Welcome to the Deep Dives. Today, we're getting into one of those effects that just feels essential, the phaser.
Oh, yeah. That gorgeous swirl, that motion, it adds so much texture.
Exactly. Whether it's on clean chords or like pushing an overdrive. And we're focusing specifically on a really iconic line, the BRS PH series.
Right. We're going deep on this one. The goal is to really track how these pedals evolved, technically and tonally. We're talking the PH1, the original, right through to the PH3, the modern digital one.
Yeah, and it's not just a history lesson, is it? It's more about how Bonn SS managed that balancing act, keeping things musical, smooth, but also pushing the tech forward for like 3 decades.
That's the core of it. And we've got some great source material here, details on the circuits, the sound, the impact of each model. PH1, PH1R, PH2, and PH3.
So for you listening, the big takeaway should be understanding that shift, right? From the early analog stuff, the JFD design.
Where things like circuit size and noise were real limitations.
All the way to the digital era, DSP, where suddenly you get this explosion of features. Understanding that journey really explains a lot about modern pedals.
Exactly. Let's dive in.
Okay, so where else to start but the beginning? 1977. That's a massive year for Boas, isn't it? Launching their whole compact pedal line.
Huge. And the PH1 phaser was right there at the start, part of that initial legendary trio.
With the OD1 overdrive.
And the SP1 Spectrum, yeah. That launch basically put BOSS on the map overnight. Solid build, that iconic look.
And reliable. Roadworthy stuff.
Totally. But the PH1 specifically, it wasn't just about being compact. It was designed to sound, well, better than some of the dominant phasers around then, especially some of the American ones. It aimed for a different kind of sonic quality.
Okay, so what was under the hood? What gave it that quality?
Right, so the core was a classic analog setup, a 4-stage phase shift circuit using JFETs.
JFETs. Junction field effect transistors. Why those?
Well, JFETs are key. They have this really nice, warm way of handling the signal, less harsh than some other components, and they're great for creating the variable resistance needed for phasing without adding nasty artifacts. And 4 stages, that's kind of the standard recipe for that classic phaser sound.
Right, 4 notches moving through the sound, but what actually makes the move?
That's the LFO, the low-frequency oscillator. In the PH1, it was a triangle wave LFO.
Triangle wave.
Yeah.
So smooth up, smooth down.
Exactly. It gives it that really gentle, sort of liquidy motion. And the controls were dead simple. Just rate for the speed and depth for the intensity.
Basic. Keep it simple.
Yep. But simplicity wasn't the only thing. Our sources really stress one major design achievement. It's noise floor.
Yeah. Phasers back then could be noisy beasts, couldn't they?
Oh, absolutely. LFOs, variable resistors, they often introduced hiss. But the PH1 was engineered to be quiet, seriously quiet for its time. Some early ones even used carefully matched discrete transistors in the LFO section. It contributed to this really polished, almost hi-fi kind of modulation.
So if you put it up against, say, an old MXR Phase 90, legendary sound. But
it's often pretty noisy. Yeah. The PH1 was the cleaner, more studio-friendly option. It didn't have that really aggressive, swampy whoosh sound.
more subtle.
Much more subtle. Smooth, clean, like a shimmer. It wasn't about stamping all over your tone. It was about adding this sophisticated movement underneath. Great for cleans, jazz, layering sounds in the studio where you wanted motion without grabbing all the attention.
Which is why collectors often talk about its warm, understated character, right?
Yeah.
It sounds more natural, less like an effect bolted on.
Exactly. It felt integrated with the guitar tone. That's the appeal. But that subtlety, it came with limits.
Okay, what were the drawbacks?
Well, the biggest one, stemming from that simplicity, was no feedback control. What BOSS later called resonance.
Right, so you couldn't feed the phase signal back into itself.
Nope. And without that feedback, the peaks and notches in the filter stay kind of broad and gentle. You just couldn't get that really intense, sharp, swooshing sound that maybe funk players or psychedelic guys were after.
So it set a standard for quality and low noise, but maybe left some players wanting a bit more drama.
Perfectly put. It's the foundation. Amazing for what it was, but it paved the way for wanting more. Just to nail the tech specs, made from 77 to 81, power was 9V battery or that specific BOS ACA adapter.
The ACA adapter, not the standard PSA.
Nope. Unregulated 12 volts, which is those early circuits kind of needed, but yeah, a pain later on for pedal boards. And of course, it had that buffered bypass standard BOS.
Okay, so PH1 is quiet, it's subtle, but maybe not dramatic enough for everyone. And BOSS clearly listened because just 3 years later, 1980, we get the PH1R.
Yeah, this was a quick evolution. It shows BiSS was paying attention to what players were saying was missing from the original. They realized subtlety wasn't the whole picture for a phaser pedal.
So what was the headline addition? The big change?
One knob, resonance. That's the absolute game changer here. Adding that resonance control completely transforms what the pedal can do.
Resonance. So that is the feedback control we were just talking about?
Exactly. It lets you feed some of the output signal, the wet phase-shifted signal, back into the input of the phase stages again.
And what does that do to the sound, physically?
It makes the filter peaks and notches much more intense, sharper, deeper notches, higher peaks. So the overall sweep just sounds way more pronounced, more dramatic. You get that classic swoosh.
Right, makes the effect jump out a lot more. Less background shimmer, more foreground movement.
Totally. Now, crucially, architecture-wise, it was still analog. Still had that lovely 4-stage JFET core from the PH1, so it kept that warm.
Didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Not at all. But they integrated that feedback loop really well. And the sources also mention they tweaked the op amps slightly compared to the PH1.
Op amps.
Yeah.
Why fiddle with those?
Seems it was to give it a bit more headroom, make the modulation curve feel a bit stronger, more intense. So even if you didn't crank the depth, the effect felt more, well, present.
Okay, so the PH1R keeps the good stuff from the PH1. The warmth, the quietness relatively, but adds this whole other dimension of intensity.
Exactly. It suddenly had a much wider range. It could still do the subtle thing, but now it could also nail those funky rhythm parts, those big psychedelic leads. It could handle distortion better. Just a way bigger vocabulary.
But that sounds like a pretty significant pedal, historically.
Oh, massively. Because it was such a clear improvement, it fixed the one main complaint about the PH1. The PH1R really became the blueprint for most of the BISS analog phasers that came after it. A lot of people still think it's maybe the perfect analog phaser, just the right balance of warmth and control, the sweet spot.
Interesting. Did anything else change technically? Power? Bypass?
Not really. It was mostly about the circuit. Still buffered bypass, still mono output, and yes, still needed that ACA adapter.
Still rocking the ACA.
Yep. So sound-wise, huge step up in flexibility, way more depth available thanks to resonance. But maybe the LFO speed range was still a little conventional compared to what came later. But yeah, a definitive refinement. Set the stage for more complexity to come.
Okay, so the PH1R added control. Now, fast forward to 1984, and we get the PH2 Super Phaser. And super feels like the right word here. This one feels like BIS really pushing the analog design to its limit.
Absolutely. This is the peak, the summit of their analog phaser journey. And the fact it was made for, 16 years? From 84 right up to 2000? That's a serious run. Tells you how well it's received.
16 years is huge in the pedal world. So what made it super? What was the leap from the PH1R?
Complexity, multi-stage complexity. The PH1 and 1R were 4-stage. The PH2 had a multi-stage JFET design, but the key thing was selectable circuits. There was a new mode switch.
Okay, mode I and mode 2. Let's break those down. This feels like the core of the PH2.
It totally is. Mode, it's kind of like your safety net. It gave you that classic, warm 4-stage sound, very much in the vein of the PH1R. So players familiar with that sound felt right at home.
Familiar territory. And mode 2.
Mode 2 is where things got wild. This used much deeper circuits specifically. It brought in 10-stage and even 12-stage phasing.
Whoa, hang on. 12 stages. That's triple the original PH1. What does adding that many stages actually do to the sound?
It drastically increases the number of notches and peaks scooped out of your frequency spectrum. More notches means the sound gets denser, thicker, richer, and the sweep itself becomes way more intense and complex.
So it's not just a deeper whoosh, it's like more stuff happening within the whoosh.
Exactly. At 10 or 12 stages, the filtering is so complex and there's enough inherent delay and feedback in that many stages that the sound starts to take on qualities you might almost associate with, like flanging or even a rotary speaker. It gets quite metallic, almost watery and vocal sometimes.
Okay, I can see why they called it super. That sounds like a massive jump in tonal range.
Huge. Suddenly you could get these really thick, washing, synthy kind of sweeps, great for atmospheric stuff, psychedelic rock textures, but also, critically, it became a key sound for early shoegaze.
Ah, the shoegaze connection. Makes sense. Bands like My Bloody Valentine, Ride.
Yeah.
They were layering tons of modulation, often burying the guitar in it. The sheer depth of the PH2's Mode 2 could get you that wall of sound complexity from one pedal.
Precisely. The PH2 was perfect for that late 80s, early 90s alternative vibe because it could go from subtle shimmer to just completely overwhelming, lush, swirling madness. It was pushing analog JS circuits about as far as they could go sonically. That really dense, almost out-of-control modulation is classic PH2 mode 2.
Right. But pushing analog circuits hard
Yeah.
often comes with a price, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned noise earlier.
Yep, that's the trade-off here. Our sources are pretty clear on this. Even though it was more complex and had this incredible sweep depth, the PH2's analog circuit was actually a little bit noisier than the PH1R.
Really? So the PH1R was cleaner?
Yeah. To get that many stages, that much intensity out of a compact JF design, it just inherently brought the noise floor up a touch.
So that's interesting. The PH1R is praised for being balanced and quiet. Then the PH2 adds all this complexity, but maybe sacrifices a tiny bit of that pristine quality. Was the versatility just worth that slight increase in hiss for most players?
I think for the time, absolutely yes. The goalposts had moved. It wasn't just about subtle sophistication like the PH1 anymore. It was about maximum sonic possibility in an analog box. That slight noise increase was deemed an acceptable trade-off for getting those incredibly deep multi-stage sounds. And you have to remember the context. The PH2 was the last analog phaser BSS made. This was it, the high point before everything changed.
The final word in their analog phaser story. A real benchmark then. Closing out almost 2 decades of refining that JF Karat approach. And then the big pivot. We jump from the analog peak in 1984 right into the new millennium, the year 2000. The PH3 phase shifter arrives. And this is a whole new ballgame, isn't it?
Yep.
We're talking digital now, DSP-based.
Completely. It's not just an update. It's a fundamental shift in architecture and philosophy. And the key question isn't just what the PH3 added, but maybe why that analog approach, even at its peak with the PH2, had kind of run its course.
What was the wall they hit with analog?
Well, it comes down to complexity versus size, noise, and especially the feature set players were starting to demand. Analog circuits are physically limited by their components. DSP, digital signal processing, just blew those limitations away.
So digital allowed them to do things analog just couldn't.
Pretty much. DSP could perfectly model different stage counts, 4, 8, 10, 12 stages, just like the PH2 offered. But it could also create effects that were basically impossible for a traditional analog LFO and phase circuit.
And the prime example that has to be the different sweep modes, right? The rise and fall modes.
Absolutely. That's the killer app of the PH3, technologically speaking. See, analog phasers sweep up, then they sweep back down following the LFO wave. Simple. But the PH3 introduced rise mode, where the sweep seems to go continuously upwards.
Like it never turns around.
Exactly. And fall mode, where it seems to go continuously downwards, it uses clever algorithms to keep shifting the filter notches in one direction, creating this feeling of endless ascent or descent. It's sometimes called infinite sweep. You need precise digital control over time to do that. It's related to pitch shifting tech, really.
Wow. And then there's step mode, too. That sounds even less like traditional phasing.
Oh, step mode is pure digital territory. Instead of a smooth sweep, it makes the filter jump between specific frequency points in a rhythmic, almost robotic way. Creates these staircase patterns, great for experimental sounds, rhythmic textures, totally outside the smooth analog world.
So way more sound options. But it wasn't just about the sounds, was it? The PH3 brought in features that just became standard for modern pedals.
Yeah, the usability factor was huge. First off, tap tempo.
Oh, essential. Just hold the foot switch down.
Yep. Sync the modulation speed to the song tempo instantly. Massive for live playing. Second, an expression input. Plug in an external pedal to control the rate or maybe the depth in real time with your foot.
More hands-free control.
Exactly. And finally, a really big one, stereo output.
Right. The PH1, 1R, and 2 were all mono. Stereo is a huge deal for modern setups.
It really is. Suddenly you can spread that swirl across the whole stereo field, makes a massive difference in recordings or complex live rigs. The PH3, because it was digital, could pack all this in. It became like a modulation multi-tool, powerful enough potentially replace several vintage pedals.
Okay, so it's incredibly versatile, packed with modern features.
Yeah.
But there's always a but, isn't there? The classic analog versus digital debate. The warmth factor.
That's the main critique you hear from analog purists, yeah. And it's not entirely unfair, especially talking about DSP from the year 2000. While the PH3 can accurately model the mechanics of phase-shifting notch movement, it arguably doesn't capture the same organic character of those old JHEPs.
What is it about the JFETs? That subtle compression you mentioned.
Partly, yeah. Analog fans argue the JFs color the signal slightly, maybe compress it a touch before the phasing happens, giving it this thickness, this chewiness that early digital found hard to replicate. The PH3 sounds very clear, very pristine, incredibly flexible, but maybe not quite as organic or warm as a good PH1R.
So the PH3 becomes the champion of flexibility, modern convenience, features, but maybe at the cost of that specific vintage feel.
That's a good way to put it. It absolutely set the standard for digital phasers for years, showing that programmability and expanded features were the future, rather than trying to cram even more stages into an analog box.
Okay, let's try and pull all this together now. Looking back at the PH1, the 1R, the 2, and the 3.
Right.
What's the big story here? What's this evolution tell us about Bios's approach over the years?
Well, the narrative that really jumps out is this relentless push for more sonic depth and control. First within the analog world, hitting a ceiling and then breaking through that ceiling with digital.
Right, so the first part, the analog journey, PH1 through PH2, that was about adding layers, wasn't it?
Exactly, it was incremental. Start simple, PH1, add the crucial control, resonance in the PH1R, then push the complexity to the max, multi-stages in the PH2, but all while trying to maintain that core, warm, JFA-based analog sound.
And then, boom, the PH3 arrives and the focus shifts completely.
Completely. The digital transition wasn't about making the PH2 sound better necessarily, but about overcoming its limitations. The PH3 delivered programmability, those unique sweeps like rise and fall, the rhythmic step mode, and the modern I/O like stereo and expression. Stuff analog just couldn't physically do in that format.
It's really clear when you just list the key additions over time.
It really is. You start with just weight and depth, then you add resonance, then you add selectable modes with way more stages, then you get the digital explosion, all the modes, tap tempo, expression, stereo. It's a perfect timeline of innovation responding to what players wanted.
But through all those changes, different circuits, analog to digital, is there a common thread? Something that defines the entire PH line?
I think it's that balance of usability and musicality. Bios always seemed to engineer these pedals to be reliable, road-ready, and fundamentally musical. The PH1 was praised for being quiet, the PH1R for its perfect balance. Even the complex PH2 delivered really lush, usable sounds. They never really made a phaser that was just like a crazy noise machine for its own sake. The modulation always felt smooth and controlled.
That's a good point. There's one other detail, kind of practical, but it really marks that shift from vintage to modern, doesn't it? The power supply.
Ah, yeah, the ACA versus PSA thing. It sounds minor, but it's actually huge for usability.
Right. Those early ones, PH1, 1R, 2, needing the specific ACA adapter, that could be a real headache on a modern pedal board.
Oh, totally. Unregulated voltage, needing specific power supplies or daisy chaining tricks. Complicated things. You had to know what you were doing.
It could definitely trip you up at a gig if you grab the wrong power supply.
Absolutely. Then the PH3 comes along, and it just uses the standard PSA adapter, the normal regulated 9VDC that everything else uses.
Plugs right into your modern power brick, no fuss.
Exactly. That switch just made the PH3 instantly integrate into any modern setup. It cemented its place as the go-to for players who valued that convenience and flexibility, maybe over hunting down the exact vintage power requirements. It was kind of the final step into the modern pedal era for the PH line. #outro.
Wow. Quite a journey, huh? From that subtle, simple four-stage JF box back in '77.
All the way to the super flexible, tap tempo, stereo, DSP-driven PH3 that's still going strong today. It really shows how technical hurdles often force the biggest innovations.
Yeah, and I think the key thing to take away from all this is understanding that cycle. Bios pushed analog as far as it could reasonably go with the PH2, getting incredible warmth and complexity.
But to get the features players started demanding tap tempo, those unique sweeps, stereo, they had to go digital. That initial quest for more depth, first through resonance, then through more stages, eventually led them straight to DSP as the only way to get true versatility.
Which leaves us with a kind of interesting question to chew on, doesn't it? Thinking about the future. We know the PH2 was the peak of analog complexity, prized for that JVIT warmth. And we know that PH3 offers basically endless digital options.
Right. So could Bios ever circle back? Could there be, say, a future premium PH4 that deliberately goes back to analog, maybe using modern super low noise components, proper regulated power, but aiming specifically to recapture that lost analog warmth and feel that some people argued the digital models miss?
It's that fundamental tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
Vintage analog feel versus modern digital flexibility. Where does the balance lie for the next generation of modulation? That's something to think about.